Hello, Sebastian. So nice to have you. Welcome to the future of UX.
Hey, Patricia, nice having me.
I'm super excited that we finally have the chance to talk. I actually wanted to invite you for a really long time. I remember when you applied to be a member of the ADC, I think like 2, 3 years ago. And you had this presentation, and then I already thought like, oh, he's so cool. I need to invite him. And then it took some time, but now we're finally here. There are so many things that I find pretty fascinating about you, and we will dive into all of those things in the podcast episode. But before, I would love you to start actually with your journey. You've been in academia, you've written about AI and design, and then you also moved back into industry. And I'm super curious to learn a little bit more about your career and where you're currently at.
Yeah, thanks for the flowers, Patricia. Um, yeah, let me start with my recent journey. I'm director UX design at Virtual Identity, which is a digital agency based in Munich, Freiburg. We have also part of my team is in Porto. And we have some colleagues in Vienna, and what I do there is together with my lovely design director Jan, we are running a UX design team. There approximately 16 people, and there's usually this part of like team management, leadership. But what I also like to do is like working on client projects, usually bringing in topic of AI. This is for me pretty exciting and new. 2 years I'm there. A lot of growth for me personally, I have to admit. So for me, leadership role that was new. Um, Although I had a professorship for 5 years, but that is a different kind of leadership. You have students and having a team and being responsible of AI disrupting a lot of what we are doing as designers. That's a whole different challenge, I think. Yeah, and before that, as I mentioned, I was a professor of design management. I was director of the design management department there in Berlin. It's a small private university. And before that, I was actually a postdoc in design, also at the private university in Berlin. Prior to that, I was writing my dissertation on kitsch, which is fun and took me like 3, 4 years. A book about this. Very, very much in the beginning. I'm also kind of like old. I'm almost 50 years old.
But you look so much younger. I think that's
Yeah,
funny.
look here, thank you. I started my career very, very early in 2000 in a design agency as a design intern, and then I switched to concept and text because the director at that time, he saw any kind of potential in me. He said, "Okay, come to the conceptual side and leave design." I did that, and then the bubble burst, the infamous yeah, first internet design bubble economy bubble burst, and then I went to study media studies and then media art. I'm an artist also. I have a diploma in art, and so yeah, it's
Wow,
basically
I
a
didn't know.
very meandering yeah CV I have there collected.
Quite impressive. Also, not the typical linear career path that a designer basically goes through, but also looking left and right and like seeing where the wind really takes you. I think that's super, super interesting, especially in times like these with AI, where all our jobs are currently all, changing. Everything's changing, so we need to readapt ourselves a little bit. And I think this is
Mhm.
pretty interesting. You did this quite some quite a lot of time actually in your career, I think. And another topic that you talk about quite a lot is the idea of empathic web, which I find pretty fascinating. So, how would you explain that concept in like super simple terms to someone who has never heard of it?
The empathic web is pretty much an idea that we developed at VI, at Virtual Identity. And the idea is that what we observed was AI was capable of inferring a lot of data from people, and the ability to actually decipher emotions got better and better in the last maybe 2, 3. We can see that with ChatGPT is basically able to know when we're frustrated because we're typing that in, and then kind of also reacting in an empathic way. That triggered our fantasy to say, okay, what about a design world or a world of digital experiences that is not cookie cutter anymore? That is not just like your usually behavior based personalization, but is something that is actually referring to your current emotion. So that is adapting the tone, the content, even the interface design based on how you actually feel at the moment. So that is in a nutshell the empathic web, and let's say revolutionary uh, s- idea behind it is that we can and that we want and foresee in a sense that digital experiences are going to be empathic in the future, meaning that they adapt in real time to the user's emotions. And the reason why we see that so clearly is not only that the technology is there, but also that we feel that users want that more. Because what we can see is uh a said ChatGPT is able to do that already, so we're getting used to it if we want to or not. Sometimes we call it sycophantic, saying that the machine is too positive about the things that we throw at it. Like, that's a great idea. That's empathy in you know in practice, so to speak. And yeah, I know you're feeling down because yeah, I can feel with you. So it's just a simulation of that. But the interesting part is it's working.
Hmm.
At a certain point, I think we are expecting that.
Hmm.
That's how we come in, and we also see that less and less people go to websites because the experience there is underwhelming. So you don't find the information. It's just you clicking through a desert of. And we also see that we need a new kind of experience that is more catered to how you feel in the moment. That's
And
the empathic web.
how would you say the AI gathers the right informations about the user's feeling? Is it through like face tracking or just the way the user writes something or the
Hmm.
way, I don't know, the user flow? Maybe
Yeah,
if users are angry, they're, I don't know, clicking on certain buttons more or
yeah,
like cancel,
yeah.
double click or something. I don't know.
Yeah, rage clicks. They are called rage
Rage clicks.
clicks. And it's a clear indication of an emotion. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like layers of technology that can basically grab data and infer emotion based on that data. I think you already described those layers. So mouse behavior is a very like how users feel. And we built a prototype like 2 weeks ago where we built a mouse tracking system, and then we not only have these movements where or like rage clicks is like a lot of clicks on something that is not a link, any kind of like white space or like whatever element that is not referring to another element is considered a rage click. But the interesting part starts with the journeys. Do people click from, I don't know, product listing page to the product detail page, scrolling, going back? So how does the journey look like, and what can you actually infer Are people like stressed? Are people like losing focus? Are they hyper focused? Do they seek information, or do they, stroll around and just want to get inspired? Are moods, emotions, and people also have like these kind of like expectations. And you can all
Mhm.
bake that into a system that tracks that from the mouse movement based on how people react, where they go. And we did that, and I think what we showed and what we realized is that is super interesting. We can then adapt the content and user interface based on that, and like
Fascinating.
our small prototype, and we want to build on top of that, show that it's possible, it makes sense, and it's also visible, and you can see if somebody is stressed or clicking around, then copy text says, take your time, don't stress. Of course, it's just like a preliminary idea of how it can look like, how it can feel. But I think this is the direction it goes. And what we did also, like very briefly, we took the video from the viewer and kind of like put it on top of the mouse interaction, and so we wanted to understand if it's contradictory what the people in their facial expression and what the mouse movement tracks, and we found out that it's not contradictory. So we don't need the video interface or the video screen, the facial recognition. I like that because I think that we can go into that later, but there's a couple of things wrong with facial recognition. And we also have like another tool called Hune that is tracking voice if you interact with an AI assistant, and that tracks this emotional state of like how you talk, the modulation of your voice, and what you say, and it can really pretty much infer that emotional states. It comes off the shelf with an API, so it's really really interesting.
Wow. I mean, I must say I'm personally fascinated by the whole idea of personalized interfaces or also generative interfaces. Like for me, generally, like personalized digital experiences are something that we should definitely aim for. Like, I can't believe still that every website looks the same for every person, for every user, although users are so different, thinking about accessibility, the different needs, the different jobs they want to be done. So I think this is fascinating. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, I know that this is technically very challenging experiences based on things that you track. So what would you say, why is now, exactly now, the right moment for something like the empathic web? What would you say what changed technologically, but also maybe culturally, that makes this possible, or at least in reach?
Yeah, very good question, Patricia. I think like maybe 2, 3 things come together, and I briefly touched on that in the beginning. One thing is that I think people getting more and more used to empathic experiences, and we see that with large language models. So what these large language models do is actually not just like giving you the information very like dry, but they already have that kind of personality. So ChatGPT, for example, you can choose between, I think, 6 or 8 different personalities, and that gives you already like this kind of direction that people expect the AI to be, to have a certain feeling, to have a certain like, what is the parasocial bond that you have towards these kinds of systems? And I think that includes the idea of an emotional involvement, and empathy is this kind of like that the machine not only understands how you feel but reacts to that. That's the empathic parts. What they do is at least the LLMs that I use, they already know if I'm stressed and want less information, give me just the headlines and da. That is already happening in the background, and I think that's a shift that is, if you extrapolate this into the future, I think in 1 or 2 years we will users will generally digital products to be, catered to their specific needs, to how they interact. Large language models or Google now using AI search. So what would be the reason why I visit any website or like have any kind of brand experience from a perspective of brands and what kind of story do they tell? I think the empathic web is the answer to exactly that kind of problem. And the third one, I'd say it has to do with also agentic AI, that if we have more and more agents that do the jobs for us, what leaves us, like what's in it for us? So what's the fun
Yeah.
of in any kind of information system? And I think that could also be a great answer, that all the things that needs to be handled in the background agents can do, and the things that where we really want to like have a great interaction, like learning or shopping or something like that, where we want to, have great experience, that can be something that the empathic web can do for us.
hmm Yeah, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I'm very curious to see how things are evolving in the next years. You talked about agents. I think this is also pretty interesting. Like, what kind of, what also agents will change in this whole process. The whole design process is changing. And I'm wondering, like, from your experience, also from your experience in academia, what would you say that how is the design process changing in general? You mentioned agents, so this is changing a lot of this like typical design process. But then we also have the personalized web, or the empathic web, which is also changing the design process because the result is different. It's personalized instead of the
hmm
static interface that you design. What would you say? How does the process change with these changes that are probably coming?
I, I mean, I can tell you what I see right now, and I can tell you also what I think will happen in the future. Uh, let's start with the empathic web and then go to the agent or agentic UX. I think that with the empathic web, the first thing that I think will change for designers is they need to think not only how a general website or a digital experience will feel to a user, but like what are certain points in the journey where people have certain expectations, certain emotions, certain, you can also see that in the data, like if they drop off, if they are frustrated with an experience, you can start thinking about that. And I think the process of a designer will start with like, okay, now I need to take care of like not only the general experience, but like in every step and sub step in the journey, how do my users feel? How can I change that kind of mood or feeling that people have towards a better experience? And of course, we have the usual toolbox, but I think in the empathic web, there's all like um, there I call them dynamic levers and static levers. So dynamic levers are more like information density. You can change that. You can change the tone of voice, micro copy. You can change the way you design certain informations, the flows. Everything can be drastic, dense, full of information, but it can also slow down, be calming, being a focus. You can change that by using those dynamic levers. The static levers are more like signaling insular, uh, I don't know, trust signals, for example, if you have like social proof, like people testimonials, stuff like that. So people are unsure or overwhelmed or, you know, cannot really decide. You can give them some sort of like hand and say, okay, other people thought about this, or here's like a trust signal, for example, for a certain web shop, like a certificate or like trust, like a ranking system of like super trustful shop or whatever. And at the end, like like you create that, and what you can do as a designer, you can adapt the tools that you already have with personas. You can put in moods. So you know your typical pains and gains, all these jobs to be done and stuff that you have in personas. You can also say, okay, what kind of moods do people search for? Like, how do they usually come in? Or in a user journey, you have these. Of course, you track emotions, but you can like connect these emotions to like different kind of mood states that you want to change. So if people drop in emotions like at a certain point in the journey, they have a bad experience, how can you change that? Not only in like the interaction, but also in the mood. You can have like co-creation processes in terms of mood states. Where do people want to end up and stuff like that. All of that is great, and of course, then the next step would be to also think of it as an interactive experience where you can use AI to automate these kinds of things that you do by hand eventually. That would be the empathic web, and for the agentic, I think that's even more fascinating, because at the end, I think agentic and empathic will coalesce in a sense that agents will know how you want to feel and negotiate with other agents, not only your preferences, but also the feelings that you want to have in a product. So, but yeah, for agentic UX, we see the change in processes a little bit slower, I think, taking off, because I think a lot of designers need to wrap their head around that design. Usually they were designing for users, for human users, and now the agents become a persona in themselves. So that's a new way of thinking about digital. Agents want different things. They don't want shiny, front end interfaces. They want very, very like highly optimized, performance based APIs, interfaces where they can like, access a database, see if things unstock, report that back to another agent, which is then ordering stuff. And so it's a different kind of like designing, and it's way more optimized for an agent, doing their things and not just strolling around and looking for getting it.
I think this is such an interesting point, right? Because I assume that a lot of people are asking themselves, how can I optimize my website for an agent? Because now it's very likely that an agent basically uses your web page. You already mentioned a couple of tips, like making sure that it's easy to reach the API, that the databases are connected, that the information is correct. Are there any other tips of how to structure? I mean, probably not for apps for now, but like for web.
Yeah, you have like in the old days, you had a robot TXT for those web scrapers. Like Google had these web scrapers that were scrolling through the web and indicating websites. And I think that is partially intact. But you have also like a hierarchy of elements, headlines. All of this is represented in a thing called schema, and you have these schema. You can optimize schema forms so that the LLM knows like what's a element, like what's a picture, what's a headline, how do they relate to each other. They find all the information that we as human beings can actually assess in 1 millisecond, because we see it as a whole. Yeah, computers or AI, they just follow a structure that is laid out for them. So the more lucid the structure, the more clear the structure, the better they can find things. And as I said, they are optimized for performance. So what we know from the first like tests and stuff that ChatGPT does with their agents, if the agents don't find things in a certain period of time, and that's usually milliseconds, they go back and search for another website and get the information there. So usually it's very crucial that you you open everything up and that the LLM or agent can access everything in milliseconds rather than in seconds or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's all of that is for your information.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this is definitely something that's not talked enough about. Everyone's talking about AI and how to use it and blah. But now I think this is such an important topic where you have agent basically everywhere. And of course, they're also maybe they're probably on your website. So agent
They are,
friendly.
in fact,
Yeah,
not probably. They are.
they are, right? Yeah. Not
Yeah.
SEO optimized, but agent optimized then.
Yeah, and it's called a generative AI optimization, GAIO or GEO. There are some terms out there. Yeah, of course, it's the question like how can, and it's related to these agent things. How can a large language model, which also creates an indice of the World Wide Web in order to access it for people? How can they get access, find the information? Of course, for companies, it's strategically interesting to see, okay, do I open my website to LLMs or do I close it? For forums, like for forums, it's actually an interesting question because if you have LLMs accessing your forum and all the answers that you have, you will actually sign the death, how do you say, death sentence to these
Mm-hmm.
forums. For example, Stack Overflow died because of LLMs. I think Elon Musk famously said that because nobody's coming back to the forums asking questions because all the answers, like 90% of the answers, the LLM can already answer. And that means less and less user interaction, less and less people answering questions. So that means it's a vicious circle for engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Like really plan yeah, where you want to focus on and maybe also where to block third services if
Mm-hmm.
those are agents or large language model. I think it's definitely a strategic decision. Going back to the empathic web, there's actually one thing that I'm super curious to hear your thoughts about. When it comes to like personalizing interfaces, this is all great and exciting. I'm personally like super fascinated by it, but I'm also seeing a little bit the possibility to manipulate the user in certain cases. You know, imagine that someone would like to book a hotel and then the system recognizes the user is super stressed, really needs to have the hotel booked now. And then it, I don't know, raises the prices, for example, just thinking about booking, for example, or could also be another website. And they're thinking like, wonderful, now we have someone who's stressed, let's raise the prices. I don't say that booking is doing that, 100% not, but they could, right? Because they have the information and maybe another service is using that maliciously. What would you say? Is it still worth it go down that path or how do we deal with that?
That's a great question. And I think with empathy, with human connection, I think there comes a special tier of responsibility for people building these kinds of experiences. I wouldn't say it's fair and good for a company to exploit that because it will backfire in the end. All the results that they have from higher prices, maybe people paying because they're stressed, will eventually backfire because I think that people will notice this and people will feel exploited. So what I advocate for is ethical principles that define the core experience of the empathic web. And I think with these highly advanced technological tools that can actually infer emotions comes a lot of responsibility. So we should keep the control with the users. Users should be able to know that these things run in the background and they should be able to opt in or opt out. There should be transparency built in because that builds trust, but also gives us enough maybe space to decide actually the advantages that we have from that outweigh all the information and data that we give basically to a platform. Sensitive data is a big point. We should protect that. And last not least, the exploitation. That's a thin line, and I think this always defined by usability. Like how much is it useful for people? How much are they willing to give away? Of course, we have the same with all these waves of digitalization, social media. Was the same discussion, and I think here it's even heightened. And I give you one example where I think this is exploitation and where it should be contained and understood as something that is not to be taken lightly. I think in the realm of AI companions, and they're becoming more and more relevant for people. And I think that was one example from the makers of XAI called Grok. That's a Musk company. They built an AI companion called Annie, very actively engaged in amorous relationships, or try to this parasocial bond with people. Even enticing people to give her compliments, so that really like luring people into the route of like falling in love or like having amorous relationships with that companion, undressing, all of these, sexual candor and stuff like that. So for me, that is really a boundary overstep, because this kind of signals that without any precautions, uh, they want people to actually have a romantic relation or para-romantic relationship with that AI, and that comes with a lot of like pitfalls. Like people report that whenever you have an update in these models, the personality changes, and that's for people a very stressful thing they go through. Imagine you have a spouse or like a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and from time to time they react in a totally different way, and they change personalities. That's kind of traumatic. Sometimes these products even discontinue. They're off. It's like you're being ghosted after a while. Uh, and of course this like idea of you can have a relationship with an AI, and you have the same rules of engagement as with a person who's interested in your well-being. But this way, you cannot really be sure if that AI companion is interested in you or in your data or in your whatever it is. But it gives people the feeling, and it very aggressively conveys that it is like a girlfriend. And I think that touches so many topics on like what we don't want to do and where we need to be careful in manipulating people, that I think it's a good bad case. It's a good case to see what's bad. And I just wanted to bring it up to say, okay, we have so many open ethical questions now with all of these tools, and companions is just just one part of this. The thing that you talked about, it could be another.
Yeah, definitely some downsides that we need to be very cautious about. I think generally AI, there are a lot of things where we definitely need ethical guidelines for all products. I think for all digital products, we need ethical guidelines. For AI, even more, but then with agents and empathic design, personalized experiences. Yeah, with so much possibilities, there also comes some obstacles, some downsides that we need to be aware of. And I think, how do you say, advocates to think about all the problems that are with it, everything that you mentioned, that exactly those things don't happen with the AI companion. I think this is a wonderful example of where AI definitely went into a wrong direction, but where we need hopefully some more strict guidelines, I think. Um, So if you could think about one empathic digital experience today, no constraints, what would it
I think learning is still like a thing where we have like very, very rigid user journey. There's usually content, and that content needs to be digested by somebody who learns. And you can, of course, a little bit adjust the pace, but not the content and the way it's going. And I think that this could be something that is super interesting, knowing that you are now, maybe today, you're not that motivated. You start with something that gives you motivation, and then the machine senses, okay, now I can give you a little bit more. I can challenge you a little bit. If I then feels like now I'm challenging you too much, going back to giving you a little bit more easy stuff for you to have like quick wins, to have like this kind of like feeling of being self-efficacy, like the self-efficacy that so learning would be a great playground for the empathic web, I think. And I could think about like structuring the content, the user journeys in a different way. So as I explained, as I said, if you're coming in, you're being stressed, or you're being, not really motivated, an AI can sense that and give you content in a form that builds your confidence, that builds your motivation. And once it has it, like a deep dive into a topic and learn something, but it also knows after 30 minutes maybe you're losing interest again, because naturally it's a phase when you want to have a pause, then it gives you pointers to like, let's slow down, let's shelve it. All of this can be very like yeah down to every minute in the experience.
I love that. I think this is such a wonderful example. I think is generally something that needs to change. Thinking about the younger generations, how schools are, how universities are structured, so much is changing with AI. And also this can be rethought completely. And I really, really love that example, because it makes, everyone can relate to it. Sometimes you want to watch a tutorial and you can't even like listen for a minute. You feel like, oh, this is just too much for me. But then like a mini TikTok video where someone explains this in like 60 seconds, you're like, okay, now I get it. I'm motivated again. So I think this is such a good example. Something that people actually need to build, or that like maybe universities need to build, this academia needs to implement this thought. I love that. I think this is a wonderful example.
Yeah. Not disclosing the client that we're talking with, but we have like we're in talks with a university that builds that kind of like AI product, and we are in discussion of making it empathic. So they're very much interested, and I hope we find a way to work together. But that I can only underline what you said.
What happens there? I'm definitely curious. Yeah, honestly, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights. It was super, super, super interesting. The highs and the lows of AI, of agents, of the empathic web. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing all of that. If the listeners want to learn a little bit more or get to know you even better, want to reach out, have questions, how can they reach you best?
I have a LinkedIn. Love for people to reach out, connect, ask me questions. Also from time to time post stuff on LinkedIn about the empathic web, about agentic UX, about design and AI, design leadership, concerning AI. So if people are interested, I would be happy if they follow me, and we can engage in conversations on LinkedIn. So that would be my natural channel, of course.
Perfect. I will link it in the show notes so people can reach out, connect with you, ask questions. And yes, Sebastian, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. It was super nice having you.
Thank you, Patricia, for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
ahead.